Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. With the launch of the patch 10.1.5, the first Dragonflight Mega Dungeon is finally upon us, Dawn of the Infinite, an instance with 8 bosses that's tuned to be more difficult than regular dungeons. Dawn of the Infinite is meant to feel like a 5-man heroic raid, with its own unique mechanics, as well as a variety of unique rewards, from powerful armor, weapons, and trinkets, as well as exciting new cosmetics. So far, many have been able to step their first foot into the instance and experience the difficulty curve for themselves. And some have found themselves struggling against these new challenging encounters. So in today's video, I wanted to put together a guide on how to tackle every single one of these bosses in the Dawn of the Infinite, so you can have an easier time with this instance while claiming all of its rewards, mounts, as well as cosmetics. But right before we get into this guide video, most of you watching these are still not subscribed. However, the more of you are mine, the more of you do. So let's keep it going. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell if you're watching these videos anyway, especially if you want to get more regular content regarding all of the newest Dragonflight updates and changes going forward. The first boss of Dawn of the Infinite is Chronikar, guarding the entrance into the Timeways. During this encounter, the boss will periodically use Sand Stomp, which will spawn withering puddles under players' feet. Be sure to place these withering puddles close together to maximize the space during this boss's encounter. Chronikar will leap into the air to perform an Aeon Shatter towards a player's location. Every leap will send out Aeon fragments in all directions that you need to dodge. After every leap, an Aeon residue will appear on the ground near the Shatter's location, which needs to be soaked by a player to avoid heavy group-wide damage. In most cases, the person marked by the original Shatter should also soak the residue to minimize unnecessary movement. The boss will strike tanks with Chrono Shear, applying sheer lifespan, which leaves your tanks more vulnerable. Tank players will need to use defensives to survive this attack, while healers will have to heal through a healing absorb to help dispel the sheer lifespan. Next, we have the Guardian of the Manifested Timeways. Throughout this encounter, 4 quadrants will be rotating clockwise around the boss. 2 of these quadrants accelerate time, enhances the flow of boss's abilities while increasing players' movement speed. 2 other quadrants will decay time, which decays boss's attacks while reducing players' damage taken by 20%. And all of boss's attacks will function differently depending on each quadrant. Fragments of time will launch arcane orbs outwards from the boss's location. These orbs will travel slowly or quickly depending on their quadrant and need to be avoided. Tanks will be slammed with the frontal of Unwind twice in a row. When Unwind attacks from the decayed quadrant, its second strike is heavily delayed, allowing the tanks to move out of its frontal. Party members will be marked with a Chrono Faded, which will explode with an arcane wave, dealing damage to the rest of your party. Chrono Faded can either be dispelled or you can let its duration slowly run out. You want to have the Chrono Faded debuff removed inside of the accelerated quadrant to limit the impact of the arcane wave when it comes to group-wide damage. The next boss is Blight of Galakrond. During this encounter, you'll start off fighting the Blight directly, which will occasionally release volleys of corrosive deadly expulsions. The Blight will also release a corrosion on a single player, which does intense nature damage over time. When the corrosion expires, it causes corrupted mind, causing your allies to become mind controlled. To avoid the mind control effect, you'll want to pass the corrosion around to refresh its duration by running into other players. When Blight's energy reaches 0, it will use Blight Reclamation, dealing large amounts of frontal damage to the tank. This frontal will also remove the corrosion from the tank if they're currently infected. Your job throughout this fight will be to pass around corrosion back to the tank before the boss reaches 0 energy, while avoiding its mind-controlling effect. At 80% health, the Blight will reanimate a proto-dragon Anzon. From there, the fight is basically the same, but the energy drain will be noticeably slower, meaning that you'll need to pass corrosion a couple of times before giving her back to the tank for reclamation. Anzon also gains new ability of Necrotic Winds, which will push players away and release tornadoes in all directions while dealing additional nature damage. At 50% health, the Blight will split off, reanimating 2 other proto-dragons, the Frosty Laskaleth and the Fiery Dazak. From there on, the fight is the same, but you're now dealing with 2 proto-dragons at a time, and the energy drain for corrosion is incredibly slow, meaning that you have to play hot potato throughout this encounter. Lascaleth is a frosty proto-dragon, which will immobilize your allies with Necrofrost, which can be destroyed with damage or removed with freedom in effects. Dazak runs around wildly, and your tanks will not be able to control her. This fiery proto-dragon will breathe incinerating blight breath in a random direction, which should be avoided. Dazak will also spit noxious ejection at random players, which will deal heavy nature damage. Both of these proto-dragons will share their health bar, so keep them close and cleave them down together. Next we have Iridikron, that don't expect to defeat this incarnate so easily. To stop him, we'll be working together with Chromie to break past his defenses. Iridikron's health bar isn't all that important. The more damage the boss takes, however, the more energy he builds. Your goal is to attack him enough to build his energy bar full. Tanks will be slammed by the crushing onslaught, causing them to take additional damage with every strike. The boss will also mark players with Extinction Blast, which will obliterate the targeted player. Seek protection in Chromie's bubble to help reduce its damage. After protecting the player, Chromie is exposed, which allows Iridikron to attack with Stonecracker Barrage. Tanks will want to soak in front, while everybody else will want to stay near Chromie to help reduce damage taken. Iridikron will cast Earth Surge, which protects him in a shield while radiating rending spikes outwards. The longer this phase goes on, the more damage the group takes. Break the shield to cancel Earth Surge. Pulverizing Exhalation is a wide boss frontal, which should be avoided. After breath is over, pulverizing creations will spawn on player locations, which need to be interrupted and destroyed quickly. Once the boss reaches 100 energy, he casts Cataclysmic Obliteration, dealing 17.7 million damage after a long cast time. During this time, Chromie will activate Timeline Transcendence, greatly empowering all players within the distorted timeline, increasing your damage, healing, cooldown rate, and combat resources. Using this timeline, you need to do enough damage to bring the boss's energy down back to 0 to make it through this encounter. Next, we have Tyr, the Infinite Keeper. During this encounter, Tyr will focus down the tank with Titanic Blow, which could knock them off the platform, so position away from the edges. Infinite Annihilation is a frontal attack which needs to be avoided by your group. Divine Strike will focus your tank's location, unleashing a ton of arcane damage which can be split with your 5-man party. If the strike fails to hit at least 2 players, Tyr gains Titanic Empowerment, making this encounter more difficult. 2 players will be marked by Spark of Tyr, radiating arcane damage every 2 seconds, damaging allies near you. Dispelling a spark will inflict some group-wide damage, but makes soaking Divine Strike much easier. All of Tyr's attacks will consecrate the ground, which will limit your space within the encounter. As Tyr attacks, he drains his energy. Once fully depleted, he siphons the Infinite Elfstone to shield himself. The Elfstone releases motes that will slowly travel towards its location. Any motes picked up by players will grant you increased haste as well as movement speed. Do not allow any motes to reach the Elfstone to limit group-wide damage. The next 2 bosses of this instance can be done in any order, but for now let's go over Morchie encounter. Morchie's attacks will be very similar to that of Chromie, especially if you're familiar with her loadout in the Heroes of the Storm. Tanks will be blasted with a frontal of Sandblast, which you will want to aim away from your party. Morchie will split into her alternate versions to confuse players, and after some time she will cast Dragon's Breath in front of her. Your task will be to find the right Morchie and get behind her to avoid Dragon's Breath. To find the real Morchie, look out for the hats that she is wearing, as the real Morchie does not wear a hat. Morchie will summon familiar faces which will fixate on players, chasing after them endlessly. These faces can be trapped in time traps by cutting your fixate targets into the traps, which Morchie will break periodically. Next, we have the battlefield encounter. Depending on your faction, you'll be fighting against the champion of the Alliance or the Horde, but the mechanics will be the same. The faction champion has a few abilities, one of which is Bladestorm, which will chase after a player while swinging wildly in all directions. Decapitate will be applied on the tanks, striking them twice in a quick succession while heavily reducing their healing taken. Shockwave will slam frontal cones in random directions, which your group should try to avoid. Best to stay near the faction's champion to easily dodge this attack. Periodically, the boss will call upon the Horde of the Alliance, summoning 3 allied forces to assist them. These can be made off of basic grunts, which aren't too scary. Range units will deal damage from a distance while bleeding your allies, and casters inflict group-wide damage and debuff your allies. All of these adds need to be a top priority whenever they are active. And finally, we have the Chrono-Lord Deios. This encounter is broken up into 2 stages. Stage 1 has us fighting the forces of the infinite Dragonflight. Deios will summon infinite keepers, which need to be focused down immediately. Keepers will call forth more forces to overwhelm you. They will also affect your allies with chronal burn, which needs to be dispelled, and deal large amounts of player damage, which can be interrupted. For every keeper you destroy, Deios suffers 20% of his maximum health. You will need to destroy 4 timekeepers to transition this fight into stage 2. While fighting the keepers, the tank will be targeted with temporal breath, which will deal large amounts of frontal damage. Deios will also manifest infinity orbs. When these orbs strike the ground, they'll explode into a nova, which makes your allies weaker against subsequent explosions. Standing under the orb slows its fall, which allows you to delay the explosions between the infinite novas. After Deios' health reaches 20%, the fight transitions into stage 2, where you'll be fighting the infinite dragon directly. During this time, the temporal tank breath and the infinity orbs will continue throughout the encounter. Periodically, Deios will blast Nosdormu with corrupted time magic, which sends out a barrage of arcane bolts for you to dodge. One of these bolts will turn into a temporal scar, which will stain the ground for 2 minutes, so be sure to use the limited boss encounter space wisely. And that's going to be the full guide on how to take on the Dawn of the Infinite Mega Dungeon over in the Dragonflight patch 10.1.5. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.